Shamaniacs.
GeoGearHeads.
Hello, fellow GeoGearHeads. This is Daryl W4 with Chris of the Northwest. I almost used the old name again. I caught myself, though. Chris of the Northwest and Jennifer of Team AJK back for episode 255. And we're going to be talking about ciphers again. So first off, Jennifer, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's always fun to be here.
And Chris, you know, I've already kicked this off in kind of a bad way.
Why is that, Daryl? The Daryl W4?
Yes, I'm stumbling over my words again. Can you tell it's been a long week and a long day?
Boy, I'm right there with you. You know, it's been a long week. However, you know what? We can just sit back and let Jennifer do this show. I mean, she's been here so often. She is actually like a third host.
She kind of is at that, but the problem is we have some feedback that we're going to have to kick this off with.
Isn't feedback bad in the audio world? But good in the podcasting world.
This is very true.
Oh, the English language.
Well, our first one is from Chris PT, who via Twitter corrected himself and says, a GMRS license is valid for the person buying the license and their immediate family members. And also a list of all the ham bands per license type is available here. And he gave us a link to a PDF that we will, of course, include in the show notes. So some great information there. Continuing that discussion from what, now 3 weeks ago?
Yes. But ham bands, that sounds delicious.
I was just thinking that sounds very appropriate for the holiday season.
Yes, yes. Maybe you could get a ham band to perform at your Christmas party.
Ooh, I was
it's more like a pig quartet.
Lights.
Oh, okay. It doesn't get any better. I'm sorry, Jennifer. This is all we've got.
Our apologies. We highly encourage you to make sure you are not eating when you listen to this podcast.
Especially ham.
Especially I ham.
Ooh.
Cannibalism is not permitted.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Moving on.
We have more feedback. I can't come up with a segue there, but we have more feedback. This one is from Team Mavichu. It says, interesting GPS-related issue with the New Zealand earthquake of earlier today. According to the University of Nevada Geodetic Laboratory, the island moved quite around. I think it moved around quite a bit. The maximum displacements we found with GPS are at station CMBL near Clifford Bay. 1.3 meters east, 2.3 meters north, and 0.9 meters upwards. Holy cow. That's significant movement.
Yeah, and he sent the link and the chart, which of course we'll put in the show notes. And I was just looking at that going, wow. And at the same time, I'm not even sure what I'm looking at. But that's a lot of weird movement.
That is. I mean, okay, now the Japanese earthquake several years ago moved it, we're talking a foot or so.
Yeah, and this is,
This is like 4 feet, yeah.
Well, it's
4 feet east.
Yeah, and
6, 8 feet north.
Right.
And almost 3 feet up. I mean, that's, silly us, Of course, in New Zealand, they know exactly how far 1.3 meters are. We here in America think, I wonder how many feet that is.
Yeah, the rest of the world just knows. It's only us silly Americans. Which, might actually make a good puzzle.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Because Americans can't do conversions. But we last talked about ciphers on episode 163 with The Rat, our favorite geocaching author. And we talked with Jennifer, have her come back today and talk about it again because, well, one, a lot of you weren't listening at that point and might not have gone back to check it out. But two, it's always good to get a refresher. And Jennifer hopefully is going to be talking with us again about how to kind of figure out what a cipher is on a cache page to, go and figure out the answer and find that cache.
Right. That was one of the topics that you had just kind of scratched the surface of in that talk before, and I thought I could come back and add some to that discussion. I do want to say I have to make clear from the top that I am really not in Russ's league when it comes to the topic of ciphers. I mean, I'm not even close to his league. He was the president of the American Cryptogram Association, and really involved in programming to do deciphering and stuff like that. And I can't do any of that. So what I can do is give you some insight from the perspective of somebody who has learned quite a bit about this topic for the specific purpose of solving geocache puzzles. So I thought we might have just a little general background on ciphers and then some geocaching specific thoughts about the topic, as well as some of those things to look for, when you're looking at the cache page and trying to figure out what in the heck kind of cipher you're even looking at.
So before we get too far into it, what is a basic cipher? I mean, I'm sure you're going to talk about it, but if I hear the word cipher, the first thing I think of is ROT 13.
ROT 13 is certainly an example of a cipher, and I think even the word cipher or code is going to mean different things to different people. My definition would be fairly broad, such that any use of letters or numbers or symbols that I'm using to disguise the content of some sort of a written message, where there's a specific set of rules that I have to follow to, unmask the disguise. That's kind of how I think of as a cipher. So certainly ROT 13 is a very simple example of that. It falls into the category of what they would call a simple substitution cipher, where one letter always equals another letter. And the rule in that case is just you shift it in the alphabet 13 places, and we can shift it 13 places forward or 13 backwards and end up at the same place, which makes it a very handy one because you don't have to worry about which direction you're going. But there's all kinds of other cryptogram type ciphers, and in a lot of cases it's not really even necessary that we know the name of it or that we understand what every letter maps to, as long as we can figure out enough of the the letters that are on the cache page in front of us to figure out what the coordinates are, then that's all we need to know. So there's a lot of different strategies for solving cryptograms. I tend to use an automated solver because I guess I'm just kind of lazy. So I like to plug it into an automated thing and see what it spits out. But
I think it removes any human error. You can easily go, 12, wait, where was I? Was it A, B, C, D?
Right.
And you're counting through. I agree with you. I do that too. I use a lot of automated decoders for those purposes.
Sometimes, you might not think of it as a cipher, but, even, those crazy fonts where, every letter looks like a,
the symbol or
wingding
bats.
Yeah, the wingdings or any of them. I've seen, there's so many fonts these days. I've seen one recently where they were like different movie monsters or something, or another one where it was different. I guess I was thinking about Halloween puzzles. I saw one where they were, different Halloween images like skeletons or bats or whatever. And I don't have to figure out exactly what the whole font is, but I could just sort of assign letters randomly. I'll say, okay, well, maybe that letter's A and that letter's B, and I create in writing, using letters for the specific symbols on the page, and then I throw my letters into a cryptogram solver, and then it'll spit out what the answer is. So I don't have to do a whole lot of analyzing and think, that letter appears or that symbol appears a lot, that maybe that's an E, and do it that way, when I can just assign the letters pretty much randomly and use a cryptogram solver to spit out the answer. That can
Yeah, in the live chat, Limax is saying that in the Bay Area where he is, people love using Lord British's rune code, which I'm assuming is a font.
Haven't seen that one. I have to look for that one. Interesting.
That's
There's so many of them out there.
Is that the same runes that were used in the Halloween souvenir? It was a rune. I don't know.
That was a rune one. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that one. But there are a lot of them out there. And the point of that is that there's ways to work around it by assigning letters randomly. Or another technique for that kind of a simple substitution cipher is to think about what words you think might be in there. Like maybe it starts with north, or maybe it starts with N, or 42 or 30, whatever, depending on where you live. And if you can kind of map out, maybe this is NORTH, then you can look for other ones that would be the N's and the T's and the O's. And if you fill in enough spots that way, you can do it by hand. You don't necessarily have to use the automated one if you can figure it out. Double letters, maybe that's a 3, maybe those are E's. And that's another strategy, is to try to guess what you think it's telling you. And sometimes if you can just get a couple of words in there, repeating those letters throughout there, it'll start to pop out what it is. And that's always really fun, to see it appear gradually, because you're getting close, and one step at a time it will gradually pop out at you. So that's kind of fun. But like I say, you don't necessarily need to know the name of the cipher or how it works for most puzzles. Some of the trickier ones, it really is critical to understand how it's set up, and if there's a particular key or something in there that you need. There's a lot of lingo that goes along with cipher puzzles. People talk about the ciphertext or the plain text. That's just simply the ciphertext is the ciphered form of the message, and the plain text is the translated regular form of the message. A crib is going to be a word or a phrase that is in the deciphered message. So like I was saying, we might guess that it's got north or certain numbers in it. Sometimes they'll tell you a specific word or phrase that's in there. And then if you can just figure out where that fits, then you can get the rest of the way. A number of different ciphers have elements that we call keys to them. There's a key word or a key square or an alphabet square that you have to have set up properly to decode those. So those are getting a little bit more elaborate, but again, those are the kinds of different terms or different breadcrumbs that you might look. If somebody talks about something is the key, just in the language of the puzzle, then you want to glean in on that and realize that that particular word might be useful in sorting out the cipher itself. So that's just kind of the background vocabulary of these things.
Meanwhile, Limax wants to essentially double encrypt. He wants to go, what do you say? He wants to do ciphertext that ends up spitting out hexadecimal.
Well, you can certainly do that.
But I think we were talking on one of the previous shows that you had an example actually that went like 20 or 30 deep.
Oh, I don't know if it went that deep with a cipher, but there are certainly ones that are multiply encrypted, and those can be very, very difficult unless you're just positive that you recognize what it is and you keep going and keep going and keep going. I've done a few.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I've done a few where you translate it in some method and then part of it is understandable. So like the last few words will say, yes, keep going, or, oh, you got that part. And then you kind of strip out that part and work with the rest. So you get a partial decryption at each step. And I do like that kind, because that way you at least know you've gotten some of it right. If you're just sort of trying something and then trying something else and trying something else kind of blindly without any reinforcement that you're doing it right, you're not always sure that you want to keep going
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, he says he's had a few times where he's accidentally gone beyond solving a cipher because he didn't recognize that he actually solved it.
Well, and if your answer is something like he's saying, like it's hexadecimal, or it's, some other sort of ASCII numbers or something jumping out at you, you might think it's just more cipher and keep going. So, the puzzle makers are tricky, but we do assume at least that the creator of the puzzle does want us to be able to solve it. And I think that's the kind of the fun thing about ciphers as puzzles, as opposed to the original reasons why these ciphers and codes were all developed, was like military applications and wartime and really super secret stuff where they really didn't want somebody to be able to crack it very easily. Learning some about the history of ciphers and the kind of back and forth between the code makers and the code breakers, I think is really interesting, and it is kind of a fun way to get in the head of some of these techniques, which really do go back to like Caesar, the Caesar ciphers, because Julius Caesar actually did it. And
I thought it was named after the salad.
Nope.
Oh.
Because you have to encode the salad or it goes bad.
But I think reading about that history is interesting. There's a particular book I recommend by Simon Singh called the Codebook. It's very good, and I've done at least one geocache that kind of referred to and pulled out some of the different ciphers that were used in that one. And it's just an interesting history because, advancements by one group are going to necessitate advancements by the other group. So there's this back and forth where the code makers try something and then the code breakers figure it out, and then you got to make something new. So that's why there's so many different kinds of ciphers, and why they have just gotten so much more complex, over time, because people get smarter and, figure out how to break them. So
I think we might have figured out Limax's problem in the live Q&A, or chat room. He says he's read part of Simon's book. See, he read only the first part, which is why he keeps having these problems. If you finish the book and get to the end, then you'll know what you're doing.
See, if you start with the end, then you're almost there already.
Right. You'll have all the answers. You don't have to read through the rest of the book.
See, you get all the answers. You don't even have to worry about figuring out how to solve it.
Exactly.
Oh, wait. That's not the way this works.
Getting back to thinking about our geocaching puzzles, the cryptograms are obviously a really common form, and puzzles that can essentially be reduced to cryptograms. That, like we said, that includes all of your ROTs, whether it's ROT 13 or other ones, the unusual fonts, or the @bash cipher. That's another one where you sort of just reverse the alphabet, or a straight cryptogram. Those are common, but there are lots of other types. I think the most common one, I would say, if I had to guess, would probably be the Vigenère cipher. My pronunciation is probably not exactly right on that, but it's a French word. That one it's essentially like having multiple ROT ciphers, where you take, like the first letter might be only shifted a certain number, and then the next letter is shifted a different number than the first one, and it follows a pattern using a keyword, so you know how many to shift each letter, and then you'll repeat that pattern after that. So I think a lot of geocachers are familiar with that one. It's a little harder to decode than a straight cryptogram, because you won't get, E doesn't always translate to the same letter. You're going to have, maybe T is an E, or maybe L is an E, or maybe P is an E. It varies.
I was going to say, yeah, first time through that code word, you're going to get different values than second time through that code word.
Exactly, because it shifts.
Right.
And if you're really lucky, you might hit the same word in the same place, and that's one of the ways to try to crack it if you were going to try and do it by hand. But it's just lucky if you get that. So that one, I think, is one that all cachers should try to be aware of and maybe figure out how that one works and find a good solver that you like to do that. It's not difficult to do it by hand, but if you don't know the keyword, it's just tedious. Well, let's try this word. Nope. Let's try this word. Nope. Let's try this word. After about the fourth or fifth word, you know, your eraser's worn down and you get bored. So I think, you know, you still have to think of what the keywords might be, and you might do some little tricks. Again, like I was saying, you know, if I think the first word is north, I say, okay, well, what would the keyword have to be to make it say north? And, you know, sometimes you can pull out a keyword, just working at it that way, kind of attacking it, thinking, you know, what might this say at the beginning.
A bit of reverse engineering. Exactly.
So even though I'm using a solver in that case, I'm still doing, you know, a little bit of thinking. There's other solvers that you just spit it in and push the button and it gives you the answer. But that's a whole different category of different kettle of fish, as some folks would say. So, you know, one of the things I would recommend doing for somebody that's really interested in getting into ciphers, or they've got a lot of cipher puzzles around them to deal with, would be just kind of becoming familiar with the types of ciphers, or even just the names of the different ciphers. There are some really interesting names for ciphers out there, and if you just look over a list of them, I think the ACA, or American Cryptogram Association website, is probably the most comprehensive. They have a list of, I don't know how many, probably 30 or 40 different ciphers. And then they provide you with an explanation of how it works, what the requirements are in terms of setting it up. And then they go through an example for each one. And I think in the process of reading through those examples and seeing how you would turn a particular phrase into the cipher, you can then figure out sort of how to work it backwards. And that's a really good way to kind of learn the nuts and bolts of how the cipher works and how you might try to attack it when you're trying to solve it. And I did several cipher puzzles where I pulled kind of obscure ciphers from that website, but I gave the website as a related web page, and, you know, left a couple of breadcrumbs on the page and just advised people, you know, check out the website, see if anything looks like it might relate to this puzzle, and then see where you can go. And by following the format that was given on the website, they can usually kind of work backwards through the steps and get from the cipher to the original plain text. So that doesn't mean everybody uses the ACA website. There are other websites that describe ciphers, and sometimes the details of the implementation will vary. So if you think you've got the right one, but it just isn't quite working out right, you can investigate, you know, Wikipedia or some of the other different cipher sites out there to see if there's some sort of a variation in you know, how that might be set up from one site to another.
It's just amazing when you think about how many different ciphers are available. And really, I mean, it's intimidating to say, okay, I think this is a cipher, and where do I start? But you've pointed out, look for those breadcrumbs, or perhaps the title of the cache, you know, different things. And Jennifer, I really have to say, you've changed my thinking about puzzle caches, because every time you come on the show, you say the cache owner wants you to solve it and find their cache. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's like, yeah, that's right. This isn't impossible. It may be difficult, but they want you to find it. So thank you for that encouragement. I appreciate it.
You are welcome. And it's, you know, I think it's true in, you know, 90% of the cases. There's a few folks out there, just like with their regular caches, you know, that they want to make it super duper hard, and, you know, they're proud when people can't find it. But I really think that most puzzle makers, they really do want you to find it and to have fun.
Those other ones are the cache owners that get beat up after events.
Oh, goodness. Well,
Oh, wait, I wasn't supposed to say that out loud. Sorry.
You were talking about breadcrumbs. I think a lot of cachers, a lot of puzzle makers do leave some sort of breadcrumbs, some sort of a trail for you to follow. So an example for me, I was saying, well, I put a related web page there. You always want to check out a related web page. I might
but
do
it's
something.
so easy to miss.
It is easy to miss.
It
You
is
jump
so
right
easy
down
to
through
miss.
there.
Yeah.
Of course it is. It's like all these other things we talk about, the stuff in the source code or the whatever. And I've done it myself to this day. I've been doing this a long time. And I will still miss some of those obvious, something in the source code or the related web page or the background image. Or there's just so many things to look at. And sometimes you get so fixated on jumping right into the cipher that you miss that stuff. So if you find yourself in that situation where you're lost and flailing around, do try to step back and go back to those basics. Look at those things. Titles can be really key, and anagramming the title. If the title looks a little weird, maybe there's a reason that those words are a little strange. Maybe they anagram to something. Different words within the discussion of the puzzle can lead you to believe that it's a certain type of cipher or a certain keyword that you can use. I have, like I said, several different puzzles. I hesitate to really spoil any of them here, but I can tell you I have a bunch of different ones, and there's always some kind of a little something. I've got one where you listen to a song, and the song is the Waltzing Matilda song from Australia. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Waltzing Matilda. Yeah. Okay. I won't sing it, but
now I got an earworm. No, I'll be fine.
When there's actually a particular type of cipher that you will clue in on if you listen to the words from Waltzing Matilda. And that's how you can figure out which cipher I was trying to get you to think about. So there's a lot that will help you try to figure out what might be going on there. Sometimes you've got context. Maybe they're talking about a particular time period in history. If it's a World War I thing, maybe it's one of the World War I ciphers. The couple different German ciphers I'm aware of from World War I, or maybe it's like an Enigma thing from World War II, or maybe it's even further back in history. The Mary Queen of Scots, I think, had a particular sort of a code, or just the different context for your puzzle, or the story in the puzzle, or any of the pictures in the thing might give you some sort of a toehold to get in and start moving. But if none of that works, I would recommend just sort of looking at the ciphertext, looking at what they give you, and kind of analyzing what you've got. Do I have letters only? Do I have numbers only? Do I have symbols? Do I have a combination of letters and numbers? Or symbols and letters, or whatever. Just kind of look at what's there. And if you only have letters, then there's a few things that you can look for. If you have what I would call maybe normal looking letters, say, for example, T's and E's and some N's, those letters that they give you in the Wheel of Fortune puzzle there, at the end. If you have a lot of those sort of normal letters, I would be thinking maybe I've got what's called a transposition cipher. And what that means is that the way the message has been disguised is simply by moving the letters around rather than substituting them with other letters. So if I get the feeling that, the message is there, it's basically just like a really elaborate anagram that followed some rules to move the letters around. And some examples of those include a skip cipher, where you skip over, you know, a certain number of letters each time. The rail fence cipher is another variation of that. You know, if there's a picture of a fence on the page, that might lead you to think about the rail fence. Another variation on a transposition is a columnar transposition, where you write out the text in columns and then you shift the columns around. That really masks the content a lot when you start shifting around the columns. So those are just some of the things that I would look for if I see very, you know, regular letters, not a lot of Q's and V's and J's and K's and, you know, that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Good. Yep. So you see a lot of Q's with no U's.
Exactly.
I think, that can't be right.
Right.
Yeah.
So in that case, you know, there's substituting going on. But if you're seeing, you know, stuff that looks normal, it's probably not been rotated or substituted or, you know, translated in that way. They just move things around.
I think Limax is trying to get us off track again. He says sometimes with ciphers, they don't play fair.
Well,
or
there you go.
They do.
To play fair, when you talk about a sense of fair play or a play fair, that's where doing your homework and knowing the names of the different ciphers is going to come in. If you've never heard of a play fair cipher, then saying, you know, now play fair or a sense of fair play, that won't tickle any brain cells. So being aware of the different types, even if you don't necessarily remember how it works, you know, you can look that up. But if you're at least aware that that cipher exists, then maybe you'll, you know, pick up that little breadcrumb somewhere.
But they can be just that subtle.
Oh, yeah.
And I think he's just really trying to get us off track with bad puns.
And by the way, that's my job in the podcast. So I'm offended, but we'll move on.
Well, he's trying to help you out.
Oh, well, that's nice.
He's just giving you the assist, you know, because you can't be on the podcast and in the chat room at the same time, or, you know, you kind of ignore him. One of them.
That's true.
Subtle is good. You know, subtle's kind of what we want, because that way we feel smart when we see it. You know,
that's true.
If they just kind of lay it out there in big bold letters, then
this is a play fair cipher. And
yeah.
You go, oh, well, take it, put it in a website, I'm done.
Right. So you feel a lot smarter if you pick up on the little subtle things and figure it out. So
I suppose.
Going back to thinking about letters, we already talked about cryptograms. So clearly, if you've got any kind of distribution of letters that has any sort of patterns that repeat, where it looks like, you know, it's going to be the same word appearing in different places in the text, I would treat that as just a straight cryptogram and not really worry about what kind of cipher it was. I would just throw it in the solver and see what came out. You can have ciphers that only use a few letters. Maybe it only has 5 or 6 letters in there, or even only 3 letters. I'm thinking of some different ones. There are ciphers called checkerboard ciphers, or there was the German World War I cipher that was the ADFGX or the ADFGVX ciphers. So if you see a cipher that only has those letters, that gives you a place to look. There's one called OOK. It's just OOK and some punctuation in there. The Kenny code with, what is it, M's and N's and F's and maybe some P's. I don't know my Kenny code, but that's another one that you might recognize. And there are solvers for all of those. Ciphers with numbers are a whole nother category. The numbers are going to get you letters somehow, but there's a lot of different ways that they could do that. There's a alphabet square, the Polybius square is the thing that's used in a lot of different ciphers with some variation. Sometimes it's a straight alphabet where you just go through there. We can only get 25 letters in a 5x5 square, so there's a couple different variations. Sometimes they leave out the Q, or sometimes they make I and J. They'll use those the same space, but you can use the positions in the grid, the 5x5 grid, those number positions for a Polybius square puzzle, or the tap code or the knock code, if you've heard of that before. Just by tapping or knocking a certain number of times, you'll indicate the position on the grid for the letters that way. So those would only use numbers 1 through 5, for example. There's a lot of other ciphers that use numbers. There's the Grand Prix cipher, or Morbit, which I'm pretty sure goes back to Morse code. There's a crazy complicated Russian pencil and paper cipher called the VIC, or VIC cipher. If anybody watched that movie Bridge of Spies, the guy in that used this really ridiculously complicated cipher. They couldn't crack it for years until they had one of the defectors kind of told them how it worked, and only after that could they sort that out. It was incredibly complicated to be able to do by hand, and it's in geocache puzzles as well. You know, people have made puzzles out of just about all of these, I would say. Even more things to look for. If you have lots of numbers mixed with letters, especially if you have upper and lowercase letters in there, there's some tricks like base 64 encoding, or there are rots actually higher than 25. They go beyond the alphabet because they use other ASCII characters up the chain. I think it goes up to 47 or something, and that looks really weird when you see that, because it's got all this mixture of upper and lowercase and numbers, and sometimes some symbols and stuff in there as well. So you can get another one that uses symbols, is the brain fart, except they don't say fart, with the plus and less than, greater than symbols, all that kind of stuff in there.
I just looked that up. I hadn't seen that one before.
Haven't seen that one? Yep.
No, and it was actually designed as a programming language with just 8 simple operations. It was designed to be ultra tiny, and that was fascinating. I learned something.
Yep. See, there you go. And that's kind of what I was getting at the beginning. When you ask people what a cipher or a code is, you know, if you ask a computer programmer what a code is, you're going to get a different answer than if you ask a puzzler.
Yeah,
so.
and the ook came off of that the brain fart, where, you know, instead of plus minus, they changed it to orangutan language. That's what the ook is.
Exactly.
I didn't know that.
Yep. See, geocaching puzzles can teach you so much.
So much.
So much useful knowledge here that we get knowing orangutan language. So I'm trying to think, coming back to some of the common ones that we see. Playfair, as came up just a minute ago, that is another one that is comes up quite commonly in geocaching. That one is a little bit unique in that it always comes up with an even number of letters. You have to do the ciphering in pairs, and so you're always going to have a ciphertext with an even number of letters. So that might be another way to analyze your ciphertext, is to look and see Is it an even number of letters? Is it an odd number of letters? Does it use all 26 letters or maybe only 25? You're going to have an awful long ciphertext to have all 26, but you get the idea. You know, if you've got all the letters in there, then it's possibly not one of those ones that goes off of the square that only has 25. The approaches to how to solve the ciphers are, you know, very numerous. You've got your pencil and paper, which there are people out there, and it always surprises me how many of them there are who really like to get at these with the pencil and paper. They will take the time and test these things and try them out through pencil and paper. And I have to say that if you really want to understand how the cipher works, you can't beat the pencil and paper, because through that process of, you know, writing it down and seeing things gradually appearing, working with the key words and the key squares, you really do get the understanding of how it works. Likewise, trying to write a computer program to solve the cipher, you've really got to understand how that thing works, I would think. You know, again, I don't write computer programs, but I would assume that you got to have a pretty good understanding of how it works to be able to program something. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of tools out there that can help, and they help on a lot of different levels. You know, you could get help identifying the cipher, figuring out what the possibilities are based on these things that I've been talking about letter frequency, or, you know, the types of look of the puzzle that it can go through and figure out what it thinks it might be. You'll get a kind of a list. Well, it might be this, or it's most likely to be this, but maybe it's this, and maybe it's this, and that gives you some different things to try. You could get some tools that will help you figure out what the keyword might be, some that will help you test the positions of a crib. Like if I know the word north is in there, it'll help me figure out where north could possibly go. You know, well, it might be here, or it might be here, or it might be here, and that might help you, you know. So it can take some of the more tedious steps for you, even if it's not necessarily going to do the whole thing for you. And then there are some that will do the whole thing for you if you get lucky. But lots and lots of tools out there, and I've found a lot of them, investigated a lot of them, because again, I can't create my own, and I'm either too lazy or too impatient to go through it all by hand on my own. I find some of these ones that at least can do the heavy lifting, as we might say, or the more tedious aspects of just trying different things until you hit the right one. So I do have a few I can suggest that you can put in the show notes. There's a particular cryptogram solver that I like. Geocaching Toolbox, which I talked about the last time I was on the show, has a whole bunch of different ones that they have. The Rumkin is a site that a lot of geocachers are familiar with. It's been around for a long time, and it has probably, I don't know, 12 or 15 different types of ciphers that it can solve on there. There's one from an ACA member who goes by Bion, B-I-O-N. There's a whole page of gadgets that Bion has put together that are kind of these sort of helper tools. They're not going to do the whole thing for you, but they'll help you place the crib, or they'll test the likelihood of a particular cipher or whatever. The best sort of multi-purpose one I have found is one called CryptoCrack. You have to download that one onto your own machine, and as far as I'm aware, it only has a PC version, but it can do an awful lot. It can't do everything. There are plenty that it can't do, but boy, some of them you just stick it in there and it spits it out instantly. So it's I'm not gonna say it takes the fun out of it, but boy, it does goes a lot faster.
Yes, it does. I've played with CryptoCrack because of your recommendation.
Yeah.
And wow, it is amazing. It is simply amazing.
And it keeps being updated. I don't go back and check as often as I should to see if there's a newer version. But it seems like at least once a year or so, it does get updated. So it's worth going back. And one of the things that it does that's kind of cool, it has some dictionaries, and it knows some things about other languages than English too, which is a whole nother level of ciphers that we didn't even talk about. You know, we're assuming these messages are in English, but they don't necessarily have to be in English. Those are some fun puzzles. You do your puzzle gives you, you know, Russian for the answer, or you're doing Japanese Morse code or something. You know, it's different. So that's a whole other level of
in the chat. Let's see, I have to find it. I assume it was Limax who said there was a Morse code puzzle that when you worked it out gave you a QR code.
Cool.
Yeah, he also said there's more cruel puzzlers around here that don't use coordinates in their ciphers. So you're looking for something other than those numbers, which does make it a lot more difficult.
Right. That does make it difficult. And I know one puzzler that I gave you the name of that I suggested, who has a lot of cipher related puzzles, is named GeoGearHeads. And he very often has keyword puzzles. And for some of his, you have to figure out what the keyword is for the cipher. And so just translating the cipher isn't enough. You really have to understand how it was put together and how it was enciphered in the first place. And so sometimes the tools will give you that, but not always. So it adds an extra level of complexity and really having to understand the cipher. I think he made a puzzle for just about every cipher on the ACA webpage. I think that was his goal one winter, was just to see if he could do one for every single one. And I've done a lot of them. I haven't done all of them, but I found those to be a really fun challenge to go through. And we had a back and forth. It was pretty funny. I would give him feedback on different ones and test them before they were published. And I would tell him how I figured it out or what I did, and then he would use that and make it harder. And I was teasing him that he was making these puzzles Team AJK proof, because you know, I told him all my tricks and how I go about solving it, and some of those later ones just got to be really, really, really hard. So, but it's a good place to go and look for practice if anybody's interested in doing a whole lot of variety and a lot of fun. You know, winter's coming, so if you're going to be stuck inside, you want something to do, working on those puzzles over the winter. He's got a ton of them. I don't know how many cipher puzzles I have, probably 7 or 8 or less. But if anybody wants to try any of mine, I'm always happy to give pointers. I give very tiny little nudges to just point you in the right direction and let you make the discoveries for yourself. So feel free to give any of mine a try, and practice makes perfect, you know, as with anything. Seeing more, trying more, you can always get better. And I have to put in, like I pretty much always do, a plug for Cully Long's book, the How to Puzzle Cache book. He has some really good information about ciphers, and at the back he has a multi-page flow chart where you can essentially do what I was talking about earlier. You know, analyze what you've got. Is it numbers? Is it letters? Is it normal looking numbers? I mean, normal looking letters, or, you know, kind of lots of Q's and X's and no U's. And you can sort of go through the flow chart and ask yourself these different questions about the ciphertext, and, you know, possibly end up at the answer, or at least end up with some things to try, and you can rule them out. So it's a really good reference.
Well, we got a lot of great information in this show as well. And all of these links that we've been talking about are going to be in the show notes. So make sure to head over there and check that out. And of course, Jennifer, you do an awesome blog that some people might not know about. So before we let you go, tell us about the Puzzle Cache of the Day blog.
Sure.
Geocaching puzzle blog.
Yeah, the geocaching puzzle of the day is my little blog. It's just going to be wrapping up its 6th year here.
Wow.
Coming up. I know it's really, really hard to believe. But every day there's a fresh new puzzle on there from somewhere around the world that I have looked at and enjoyed and thought other people might enjoy. And they range all different types of puzzles. There are cipher puzzles sometimes. There are logic puzzles. There's math puzzles. There's word puzzles. You name it. Pretty much any type of puzzle, you'll see it on there at some point. And I just like to give them a wider audience, you know. I've got puzzles of all difficulties, so beginners can find ones that they can enjoy. And then I also have some pretty juicy, tough ones. I usually try to reserve those for Fridays, but all different kinds and all different types. And I always like to remind people that if they have either created or solved a puzzle that they think other people would enjoy, to please send it my way, and I'll see if I can work it in there somewhere.
Nice. Well, Jennifer, thank you. It is such a pleasure to talk to you. I mean, you're like I say, you're almost a guest host on the show. You're coming in so often, but you've got such great information. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
It's a lot of fun. I always enjoy coming on. Thanks.
Now, patrons, if you want to spend a little more time with us, and really, why wouldn't you? I mean, come on. Daryl and I are going to be doing a Patron Hangout on Tuesday, November 22nd at 5 p.m. Pacific. That is 8 p.m. Eastern. Correct, Daryl?
Yep, you got it.
I did that math in my head.
Of course, the reason that you want to hang out with us is because we don't really talk much geocaching.
Not necessarily. It's just life, liberty,
Yep.
Pursuit of happiness, those kind of things.
And pursuit of technology.
Yeah, there you go. So hang out with us on Tuesday. You're going to like it. I like it.
Yeah, it's
I think I'm a wonderful person, but, you know, that's beyond what we're talking about here.
And we'll have that link in the Patreon website. So watch your patron notifications for that. Then we've got many, many more good shows coming up on the 24th, which is Thanksgiving here in the U.S. The Canadians are going to take over. So come and watch live while you're digesting that turkey. And you can check out Jay and Dave talking about, you know, us crazy Americans, I guess.
The soothing tones of the Canadians and the tryptophan will make that a memorable podcast.
Yeah, memorable is probably a good word. And we're not sure what kind of memorable will be, but we encourage you to check that one out. Then on December 1st, we've got a couple of the ladies from geocaching.com talking about the trackable partnerships. And as you probably remember, there's a new one that hits, so we'll find out more about that one there. Then on the 8th, we have Randomize Lee. Yes. And we don't have a guest for that one, and we may actually end up pushing that one back a couple of weeks to make room for another guest, but we're not going to talk about that one just yet. Then on the 15th, as everyone can probably expect, we're going to have another show on 3D printing, especially because three of us who are going to be on that show just recently got into 3D printing. So we'll talk about getting into 3D printing and some of the pitfalls you might want to avoid.
Some of us are still in 2D printing. Be that as it may. Until then, make sure you check the Cachemaniacs website at cachemaniacs.com for more on the GeoGearHeads, including show notes from this and all of our episodes. We love hearing from our listeners, so leave us feedback by emailing GeoGearHeads at cachemaniacs.com or through the many channels of social media. Your support helps keep the Cachemaniac shows coming. Please consider becoming a patron through the link on our website to support the Cachemaniac shows. GeoGearHeads is produced by Chris Umfenauer and Daryl Wattenberg. The show's copyright 2016 by Daryl Wattenberg. All rights reserved.
Cash with a cash media.